So I read on my Twitter feed this week, there are two types of people in this world: those who top their Christmas trees with stars and those who use angels. So I thought we'd have a little survey. Who has a star on the top of their Christmas tree? And who has an angel? Ooh, I think the angels are outweighing the stars today. We could probably think of other categories for Christmas. Are you a ham or a turkey family? Do you listen to the Queen's Christmas message or not? Does everyone give presents to everyone, or do you have a Secret Santa sort of system? Are presents for children in Christmas stockings wrapped or unwrapped? Do you prefer to come to church on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, or both or none? In the sessions that we've had after church the last couple of Sundays, led by Susan Adams and John Salmon, we've learned some of the history about Christmas and where some of the traditions come from. We also learnt that Christmas as a feast day in the church actually arrived very late on the liturgical calendar. It wasn't till the late 4th and early 5th centuries that the church started to celebrate Christmas. And then it was a celebration much less significant than Easter. And on through church history, Christmas had its controversies. The Puritans, for example, banned Christmas carols in England in the late 16th century. And in Scotland, we learnt, the ban wasn't lifted until 1958. Scottish, very pure people. The tradition of people going door to door to sing carols comes from this time. If you couldn't sing carols in churches, then you went out in the streets and sung them, and went to people's houses and sung them. Don't let the church get in the way of a bit of fun. And like our personal Christmas traditions, the gospel writers also have their own versions of the story, their own reasons for writing the story the way that they did. In our Christmas carols and in our crib scenes and our visual images on our Christmas cards, and in our minds from storybooks, we have kind of conflated the Christmas story into one story, and of course added in lots of things that aren't there in the Bible anyway. Remember, first of all, that the gospel writers Mark and John, neither of them say anything about the birth of Jesus. It's Matthew and Luke who give us the stories, and the stories are pretty much completely different and cannot be reconciled. We had the Matthew story this morning. Matthew has Mary and Joseph living in Bethlehem. The birth is not actually described at all. They are visited by wise men from the east. They flee to Egypt to escape Herod's persecution, and then they move to Nazareth. Luke, on the other hand, has Mary and Joseph starting off in Nazareth, going to Bethlehem because of the census. Jesus is born and put to bed in the famous animals feeding manger. They are visited there by the shepherds. They go to Jerusalem to present Jesus in the temple, and they return home to Nazareth. The thing that the writers agree on is that Jesus' parents were called Mary and Joseph, that Mary became pregnant before they were married, that Herod the Great was king, that Jesus was born in Bethlehem, and that he grew up in Nazareth. Marcus Borg says the rest of the stories are composed like overtures to a symphony. The overture indicates the themes that are to come. Matthew's overture is refreshingly simple. It's the story of Joseph more than it is the story of Mary, and it answers the questions that Matthew's community were asking. Can we be true to our Jewish heritage and still be a follower of Jesus? A lot of Matthew's gospel is written to answer that one question. Can we be true to our Jewish heritage and still be a follower of Jesus? And Matthew's answer is yes. First of all, before the passage we read today, we read Jesus' genealogy, and it's traced back through Joseph to King David and to Abraham. So yes, Jesus is a true descendant of the Jewish people. And the answer to the question is yes, because an angel told Joseph what was going to happen in a dream. just like dreams from the Old Testament, just like Jacob's dream of the ladder going up to heaven, or Jacob's son Joseph's dreams, which saved the people in Egypt. And yet again, because the Holy Family had to flee Herod and his massacre of the children, just like Moses was saved from a massacre of the children from Pharaoh in Egypt. So Matthew writes his overture to answer those questions and to lay those themes out for his gospel. The birth story also answers another question. How is it possible that Jesus is human and from God all at the same time? The answer, because his birth happened in such a way as to be sure that we would know God is with us, Emmanuel. God here in the flesh, not a Greek God appearing and disappearing at will, or a God personified in a cruel emperor, but a human being born of a humble woman in a humble way, God enfleshed with us. Now, because Matthew always quotes Hebrew scripture to support his writing, he quotes Isaiah about this special birth. He quotes Isaiah, who had said, "Look, the young woman is with child and shall bear a son, and shall name him Emmanuel." Now, Isaiah wrote those words describing a specific time and place during the reign of King Ahaz of Judea in the 730s BC. Judea was under threat from her neighbours as Assyria again rose to power. And they feared invasion. They feared a siege. Think Aleppo today. People back then were massacred at will too. The people in Jerusalem were fearful that they would be suffering the fate of today's Aleppo. And the people want a sign of hope. And Isaiah says, look over there. See that young woman there who's pregnant, that young woman who is with child? By the time the child is a toddler, before the child can choose between right and wrong, the countries that you're so scared of, don't worry, they'll be deserted. Isaiah's trying to give hope to a fearful king in the context for his time. But Matthew picks up that saying and turns it into a sign of hope to help his people understand who Jesus really is. God is now going to be understood as entering and acting within our world. One writer says the divine promise is deeply hidden in God's own being, just as the child is hidden in the mother's womb. So the promise of God is hidden in deep's own being, just like the child is hidden in the mother's womb. It's going to appear just like that. And the promise does not at all hinge on whether Mary was a virgin or not. The word in Hebrew and Greek simply means a young woman of marriageable age. The writers actually don't want us to focus on that miracle of conception. They're pointing us to a much greater miracle, the fact that God came and comes to be with us. That's the miracle. Bishop Marion Budd, who's the Bishop of Washington, D.C., says, Jesus comes to us where we are, as we are. He's not afraid of the mess we all too often make of things. For all the beauty of our Christmas celebrations, remember that Jesus was born in harsh and dangerous circumstances. We celebrate his birth not because it all happened perfectly, but because everything wasn't perfect. Imperfection is where God chose to come and chooses still. Marcus Borg talks about Meister Eckhart, who was a Christian mystic from the 13th century. He says in one of his Christmas sermons, Eckhart spoke of the virgin birth as something that happens within us. That is, the story of the virgin birth is the story of Christ being born within us through the union of the Spirit of God with our own flesh. Ultimately, the story of Jesus' birth is not just about the past, but about the eternal birth in us, in the present, now. So these wonderful Christmas narratives are not given to us to float off into a fairy tale land where it's all tinsel and angels. They are there to bring us face to face with God, now, today. Matthew's version of the story calls us to recognise Christ born anew every day, enfleshed with us. So what do we do with this birth? Do we put an angel or a star on the Christmas tree? What other choices does the birth put before us this year? As we look back on one year and forward to another, what do we yearn for? What are we seeking? What things do we want to let go of? What new things might be calling us forward? Bring those things with you to Christmas this year, wrapped up in pretty paper if you like, and allow the stories to unwrap your hopes and your needs. Allow the birth to open up something new within you. Like Joseph, who awoke from sleep and did as the angel commanded, and like Mary, who said, "Let it be with me according to your word." Like Joseph and Mary, say yes to this birth. Say yes to God with us, Emmanuel.